Well, we're back in Ezra chapter 1, if you want to turn there in your Bibles. Ezra chapter 1. We just kind of laid a foundation for this study. I'm really excited about it. I've been studying ahead, of course, and looking at some of the things that happen in this great historical book, one of the remaining historical books of the Old Testament. And but we're going to go off the beaten path a little bit today, as we look at some other passages of some prophets and also some Psalms contemporary with Ezra, and try to figure out what all was going on here. I need to finish up with just a concluding thought from last Sunday's lesson. Pastor Joel also asked me to give a update on Randy Hunt. Brother John and I were able to swing out there a little bit yesterday, and Randy is doing well. They brought a gurney in there, and he's pretty much confined to that gurney. He joked about if he got up, he would undoubtedly fall. He doesn't want to do that, as you can imagine. So, and Jan has actually taken time off work, at least in the very near future, to be with him and assist this transition in his life. And we don't know what all God has in store for him, but I promise you this, John would attest to this, he would love a visit. And with Jan being there, it would be easy to do so, to get by if you want to get by and visit him. He's sharp, mentally he's sharp, as he's always been. Again, we've enjoyed some of his stories of things that he did. He's a very knowledgeable man, but his body is succumbing to the tumor that he had, the brain tumor. He's still fighting it, and they're going to still go through therapies, but I just want to give you an update on Brother Randy. And certainly pray for Jan. Jan is taking upon herself a tremendous load of responsibility. She still teaches full-time kindergarten. They have been working for many years on a project to build a home near their son up in the area where she lives now. And she's still overseeing a lot of that with contractors. And all the things that Randy would have normally done, she's doing. She's taken up that responsibility. And she just has a lot of things on her plate right now. So she's very appreciative for your prayers, and encourage you to remember her if you would. I was mentioning last week, before I read the text again, I was mentioning last week that the theme of the book of Ezra is a theme about spiritual renewal. And we all need to be renewed. Lamentations chapter 3 says on a daily basis we need to be brought back in good fellowship with the Lord. But sometimes what happens in our Christian lives is we wander away from the Lord, and we stay away longer than we want to, and get further away than we need to. And we find ourselves one day in a very dry place. I was mentioning that this December, I'll celebrate my Jubilee, my 50 years as a Christian. I trusted Christ as my Savior as a teenager in high school. And I always, in my own personal way, we don't have cake and candles and do anything formally with my wife or my family to celebrate my Christian birthday, but I, in my own way, celebrate my Christian birthday and those milestones much like everybody else would with their natural birthdays. I reflect a lot that day. Sometimes I get aside and do things where I can go back and realize in my mind how that day changed my entire life. Well, as the years roll along, you're getting year after year goes by, and you're getting further away from the day that you were saved, and you begin to settle into these routines. And we all are guilty of taking things for granted that God has done for us. And so we need to be renewed. We get in these comfortable places. David, who was a man after God's own heart, very much in tune with God. He had a very intimate relationship with God. As you know, he wrote many of the Psalms. We have the added advantage of reading chapters of his life and his ups and downs and his spiritual challenges and how he responded to high and low times in his life. Nevertheless, wrote these words in Psalm 42, verse 1. He says, "As the hart or the deer panteth after the water brooks, so panteth my soul after thee, O God." In the next verse, he said he thirsted for God. I wonder if that describes your feelings towards the Lord today. Do you thirst after God? Is there a hunger in your soul to know him better and to serve him more faithfully? David, as you know, who is a pretty good man of God, stated that he had that inner desire to know his God and be in close fellowship with his God. And what's happened here is we read about the end results of a people who have not maintained a close relationship with the Lord over a period of years, actually decades of time. So they're far away from the Lord, and they are in need of spiritual renewal. In the meantime, God is working behind the scenes. And that's good news for us not only as a church, as a nation, to be reminded that God often works behind the scenes in our lives. Because there are some circumstances beyond our control. Are they not? Do we not get frustrated with people, and sometimes in high government positions, or people that affect our lives, making decisions for us that we don't agree with or understand, and we feel powerless to change those decisions? And they directly affect our spiritual freedoms, our Christian liberties. And we get frustrated with that. And we recognize that sometimes we take an objective look at our nation as a whole. And for those of us who've been down the road a little longer, we have to come to the conclusion that our country is moving further away from the Lord rather than further toward Him. Anybody who's been around for any time at all would have to conclude that we're not the nation we would have been even a generation or two ago relative to our religious freedoms and our spiritual pursuits. Back probably in my grandparents' day, maybe a generation before, almost everybody got up on Sunday and it was just expected they went to church. They went to their respective churches and they wanted to see what God had for them that day. And people valued the moral law of God, the Ten Commandments, and the principles we find in God's Word. And our civil laws were in line with God's moral laws. Isn't that far removed today, you know? In fact, now we're making laws and changing laws that directly deny the existence of God and the existence of His moral law. We just seem to have no regard for that. And so we get kind of unsettled about that. And we have to remember that God is working behind the scenes. We see events transpiring and we're thinking, what's in store for my children and my grandchildren and the generations to follow? We see, if I could borrow this phrase from Daniel, who, by the way, was contemporary with Ezra, and the events of this book that we're going to be studying for the next several weeks, we talk about this phrase about the handwriting being on the wall. That came from Daniel during this time. There is handwriting on the wall of our society that we see, and we have every reason to be concerned about it. So it brings about a need for spiritual renewal. Some people word it this way: our country is in need of revival, and we're in need of spiritual renewal. So we're gonna deal with that issue in the next segment of my lesson. But I wanted to conclude. I think, I don't know if you even have the outline from last week, but I think I gave you the background, the setting, and then I was going to give you the approach. What approach we take to situations like this? Because we probably fall, all of us, in one of these four areas. How are you approaching the world that you live in? How are you dealing with the changes that we're seeing happening about us? And here are four approaches that we can take. One of them is we can refuse to care. A lot of people, rather than risk the emotional roller coaster that they're on with everything happening in our country, they'll just say, I'm not going to deal with it. I don't care. My big concern is what I'm going to have for lunch today. That's something that I can handle and manage and deal with. And that I don't want to deal with all these changes and spiritual things and the spiritual decline in our nation. I really don't care. I'm indifferent to that. And a lot of people do that. Some people are very in tune with what's going on. I don't know if I can say this accurately, but maybe too attuned to everything that is happening. I shared with you long ago to keep my sanity and my sense of well-being around my household. Probably 25, 30 years ago, I told my wife, I'm going to stop watching the news. And I have. I've stopped watching. I haven't watched the news, I don't know in how many decades it's been. And now the bad side of that is I don't know what's going on in the world. Like bits and pieces. Somebody walk at me, can you believe what happened? I said, what happened? And they look at me like I crawled out from under a rock somewhere. But that's a price I have to pay for refusing to allow all the news, particularly from our media, to enter my mind. That's my approach. That's how I've had to deal with that. And people that are not like that, maybe you're a news junkie. And I watched, by the way, if I can throw this out there, I watched how my father retired. My father was a staunch conservative. He served 21 years in the military. He had some very deeply embedded principles about his life and his outlook on politics and moral issues and societal issues. And my dad retired, and for lack of anything better to do, he sat down and watched news all day. That's what he did. He watched news, the main network news. And I saw over a course of a few years how it changed my father's entire outlook on life. Now, I never corrected him on that. He was my dad. I never objected to that. I never came to him and said, Dad, you need to stop watching all that nonsense on TV. I never once said that, but I learned from that. I learned that what you put in your mind will affect what you believe in your heart. And, people that do that can often, our second approach to these changes can cause us to live in worry and fear, and sometimes even to panic about what's going on. There are many Christians whom God says are not given the spirit of fear, but of love and of power of sound mind. There are many Christians who nevertheless are living and they're just working themselves up into a situation where they're just afraid about what's going to happen next, and they're afraid about everything that happens in life, and they just want to isolate themselves from society. Listen, you're to be a light to the world and salt to the earth. It's not our job to panic and react to everything going on. Some Christians have a tendency to see these developments happening, and then they just live in fear, and they're worried about everything all the time. I feel like I could walk up to them and say, hey, did you hear the UFOs? There have been UFO sightings all over, and they're attacking the earth. And they'd be like, oh, where are they coming from? Where should I move to get away from them? They just believe everything that they hear. Hope some of you are getting convicted about that. I don't know. You can't live like that. There are other people who our third approach might be to give up the fight. To say, I can't beat them, I can't change all the wrong going on in our society and in the world. Since I can't beat it, I'm going to join them. Remember our study on 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Chronicles? I highlighted, I don't have one in front of me, but some of you may. Oh, I do have one. This list right now is an indication of what happens to people who say, I'm tired of fighting the fight. I'm going to just join the crowd. I'm going to compromise my convictions and my biblical standards. And there's a list of dozens of kings. A few of them were good and tried to fight against the spiritual apathy of the day, but most of them said, I'm tired of that. I'm just going to go along with the crowd. By the way, the crowd would be more than happy to have you. The world would be more than happy to have you join their side if you say, I'm not going to fight anymore. I'm going to give it up. I'm going to just go along with the crowd. Then there are those who take their stand. Sometimes at great sacrifice, personal sacrifice. And they are proactive. And they are outspoken about what God says in His Word. And there are men like Jeremiah and Daniel and Ezra and Nehemiah, these great characters we'll look at in the course of this study, who said, we have got to bring our people back to God. And so we're going to do what we can to do that. And that, of course, is the approach that God would have us take in our fight, our Christian battle. I look around at this church. I look at the precious children, some of whom are my grandchildren, and I have to ask myself, are they not worth it? Are they not worth it? Are you not worth it? You have to maintain your dignity and your testimony and your reputation. You need to go to your grave having people realize that you fought the fight, you finished the course, and you've kept the faith. You've done what God wanted you to do, and you may not be able to change everything that you don't like about our nation or about our society, but you've done what you could, and you engaged in spiritual battle. Years ago, King Solomon wrote these words, where there is no vision, the people perish. That didn't mean, he wasn't saying where people lose sight of what's going on or what God can do, the people. No, what that is talking about, that's an open vision. What he was saying is where there is no spiritual attentiveness, where there is no voice like your voices going out and proclaiming the truth, the people will perish. In fact, the verse goes on to say, but when people honor the law and honor God's word, they're going to be a happy people. they'll be happy and fulfilled. But when you and I, as God's remnant, are silenced and we're no longer proclaiming the truth, our nation will suffer as a result of that. Our children, our grandchildren, our society as a whole will suffer. You are God's remnant. And if you don't speak up, our society will perish, spiritually speaking. But as long as we trust in God and His promises, He will honor that and He will give us the victory. Here's what the book of Ezra is all about. It's about hope. This is beyond doubt a hopeless situation. In fact, America is doing a lot better than Ezra's people were doing in his day. We're doing a lot better. So, Pastor, we have major problems. I know, but it wasn't as bad. These people were living in captivity, in servitude. They had been exiled from their home and their system of worship. They had lost their identity. And I'll read in a moment some things that happened that reveals to us just how bad things were for the nation. But, there is still hope as long as we are able to trust in God for what He's doing. So let me now jump into this text, and then we'll get as far as we can today. I'm never going to finish this outline, Alan or Aiden, whoever's got that. There's 4 points in this outline. It'll be a good day if I can get through 2 of them, but we'll get as far as we can. Ezra chapter 1. Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom and put it also in writing, saying, Thus saith Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord God of heaven hath given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and hath charged me to build him an house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Now this is a pagan king saying that. Who is there among you of all his people? His God be with him, and let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and build the house of the Lord, speaking of the temple, be the house of the Lord God of Israel. He is the God, which is in Jerusalem. And whosoever remaineth in any place where he sojourneth, let the men of his place help him with silver and with gold and with goods and with beasts, beside the freewill offering for the house of God that is in Jerusalem. Then rose up the chief of the fathers of Judah and Benjamin, and the priests and the Levites, with all them whom spirit the Lord had raised, to go up to build the house of the Lord, which is in Jerusalem. And all they that were about them strengthened their hands with vessels of silver, with gold, with goods, and with beasts, and with precious things, beside all that was willingly offered. Also Cyrus the king brought forth the vessels of the house of the Lord, which Nebuchadnezzar had brought forth out of Jerusalem, and he put them in the house of his gods. Even those did Cyrus king of Persia bring forth by the hand of Mithridath the treasurer, and numbered them unto Sheshbazzar the prince of Judah. And this is the number of them, 30 changes of gold, 1,000 changes of silver, 29 knives, 30 basins of gold, silver basins of a second sort, 410, and other vessels, 1,000. This is a great amount. All the vessels of gold and silver were 5,400. All these did Sheshbazzar bring up with them of the captivity that were brought up from Babylon unto Jerusalem. Now, I mentioned this last week, but I want to comment that the Sheshbazzar mentioned in verse number 11 is the Persian name, in particular the Babylonian Empire probably ascribed these names just as they did to Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, for whom we know and will continue to follow along in this narrative as the governor Zerubbabel, who was the grandson of Jehoiachin, who was allowed to live in captivity and had a son, and then later another son was born to his son, and he would become the governor of the first wave of people going back to Jerusalem. Some commentaries mention that this is his court name, or the name that the Persian court used to refer to Zerubbabel by before he came and led that first group back to Jerusalem. But he, of course, is also known by the name Zerubbabel. And the theme, and again, is about restoring God's people, not only to the land that they had been taken from, but also to restore them spiritually and in regard to their godly living. It's a story about spiritual renewal. So in line of that, I want to give you some points about spiritual renewal. I was excited Sunday morning, not Sunday morning, this is Sunday morning, right? Friday morning, we had our men's Bible study. We had a great group of men out. We ran out of chairs. There were 20 or so men there for our Bible study. And I've been attending that Bible study for months. I don't lead the Bible study, but I love going to it. And but I'm a close observant and participant. And something happened last Friday that really encouraged me at that Bible study are the men there present that day. Perhaps it was the nature of the chapter we were studying or other things, but our men expressed a degree of transparency and honesty in that Bible study that I have not experienced much in my 30-something, years of ministry. Now, Bible study is a great setting for that. I'm sure the ladies get together and just pour their hearts out to each other all the time. Ladies are like that. Men, not so much. Men, not so much. There's a wonderful dynamic. I don't ever listen in on the ladies' Bible study, but I know Wendy has done a tremendous job in really helping the ladies of our church grow, and not just grow in their walk with the Lord, but grow in their fellowship with each other. It's a wonderful setting there. And we have our Wednesday night Bible studies as well. We had a great Wednesday night Bible study. My wife came home with me Wednesday night and said that was one of the best studies they ever had. And they took a lot of time in that study to just discuss their personal needs and share prayer requests. And every group has its own kind of format and how they do things. And the point I'm trying to make is those are the kinds of things that remind me that spiritual renewal is not only possible, it's probable. It's a wonderful thing to think that we can grow together as a group of believers and get closer in our walk with the Lord. And that process, sometimes by design, sometimes coincidentally, but always providentially, is happening in our church right now. That process is happening. It's beginning in our church right now. So I'm really excited about that. I'm really excited about studying a book like this that affords us so much hope on this concept of spiritual renewal. And so we want to discuss that today. The first point I want to leave with you is that spiritual renewal, if we can get on the screen, accomplishes God's grand purposes. Now, these points are all long, so write them down if you would and review them later. For 4 centuries, which is a long time, 400 years, God had been warning his people that they had better turn back to him or there would be very bad consequences. Remember that chart I just showed you? What did I do with it? 400 years. God kept coming and saying, hey, turn back to me, honor me, worship me only, love me, respect my word. For 400 years, he sent his prophets and messengers to say, come back to God or there will be negative consequences for the nation. And for 400 years, they refused to listen to him. Going way back to the days of Moses, which is much earlier than that, God left a warning to his people there. Not 400, but around 1,000 years before, God laid it out for everybody. For the Hebrews and for us today, God laid it out in black and white. Here's what God said. I'm going to quote from Deuteronomy chapter 28. Verse 64 and 2 verses following. And the Lord shall scatter thee among all people, from the one end of the earth even unto the other, and there thou shalt serve other gods, which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, even wood and stone. And among these nations shalt thou find no ease, neither shall the sole of thy foot have rest. But the Lord shall give thee there a trembling heart, and failing of eyes, and sorrow of mind. And thy life shall hang in doubt before thee. And thou shalt fear day and night, and shall have none assurance of life. It's painting a pretty bleak picture here. Really bad picture. That's why I said, we're as bad as we may think things may be in our nation right now, spiritually speaking, in our spiritual temperature, we're a whole lot better than it was during Ezra's day. In fact, that passage was going on to say this. It was so bad for the people that during the day they said, oh, we wish night would come. But during the night, they said, oh, we wish day would come. In other words, they were miserable 24 hours a day because they would not heed God's commands or turn to him and worship him. He says, okay, if you're not going to do that, I'm going to allow you to go into places of captivity. And that's exactly what happened to God's people. As we read Ezra 1, they have been exiled from their city, their holy city of Jerusalem. Their temple had been destroyed, and they got hauled away by the Babylonians. Now Cyrus the Great came on the scene, and he overthrows the Babylonians. And God's going to use these events, remember the circumstances beyond our control? He's going to use these events to bring them back into a place of fellowship with himself. But God would never forget about his people, in spite of their rebellion against him. Because whom the Lord loveth, he chasteneth. And he loves his people. And he's chasing them to bring them back into a place of fellowship. Sometimes we get distracted by the world, folks, every one of us. There are things, the glit and glitter of the world and the pull of the world. And we get drawn into that, and we slowly at times wander away from the Lord. Our intimacy with God is not what it ought to be. We don't allow and invite Jesus Christ to have an active role in our daily lives and in our decisions. And when that happens, God has to bring us back to a place where we will be in fellowship with him. And again, this passage I just read you out of Deuteronomy chapter 28 talks about people who find no ease, who have a trembling heart. They're living in an unsettledness. Their eyes fail to see the reality of their situation. They have sorrow of mind, and their lives hang in doubt, and they're living in constant fear. And many, sadly, of God's people today can be described by that passage of Scripture. They're just unsettled. They seem to have no rock and foundation in their lives today. And those uncertain times that God sends into our lives will cause us to cling to him, to pursue a relationship with God. I want to remind you about something I said last week. 7 years is a long time. Many of them lost their identity. Many of the people born during those 70 years had never been to the holy city. They don't have any memory whatsoever of the grand and glorious Temple of Solomon with its gold and its wonderful pillars and the great mat. They never saw it before. They didn't even see it get burnt down. They were born in captivity. 70 years of time had gone by. And they only knew bondage and servitude. They grew to accept it. Well, we're slaves here in a foreign land, but that's what we do. That's who we are. God never intended his people to live in bondage and servitude like that. But they just got accustomed to it. Now, sure, they heard the stories from the old-timers who would describe what it was like in Jerusalem and what it was like to go to their Passover celebrations and the great, wonderful times they had. But to them it was just a story. And I'm left to wonder myself, had I been born in captivity during that 70-year period and grew up in servitude and bondage, and that's all I ever knew, and somebody came and said, hey, did you hear what Cyrus said? We have a new leader. He's taken over. He's dethroned Nebuchadnezzar and the great Babylonian Empire. And he's giving an edict, an invitation to anybody who wants to go back to Jerusalem. Hey, do you want to go? I don't know what I would, I'm trying to think, being honest with myself, whether I jump in on that or not. The truth is, I don't like to go and spend the night at a hotel somewhere where I'm not accustomed to, I like my own spot, my own bed, my own surroundings. I like my comfortable space in life, When I say, yeah, it sounds like a great idea. Where is this place, Jerusalem? Well, as the crow flies, it's about it's 750 miles away, straight shot. But you can't go that route because there's mountains and so forth. And you're going to have to meander through some water passages and mountains, and it's going to be about 1,000 miles on foot. To put in perspective, Pastor Joe, you'd be so proud of me. I know you'd be so proud of me. I learned how to look up a Google thing and find out what's about 1,000 miles from Fresno, California, and it's El Paso, Texas. Any of you ever been to El Paso? Oh, okay, sure we have. Okay, what if I say, hey, tomorrow we're going back to El Paso on foot. We're going to walk there. That's how far it was to go back to their home city of Jerusalem. It was not only inconvenient for them, it was risky. They had to cross a hostile desert that had been decimated by years of war with settlements of people who were not friendly to them, who would not welcome them traveling through. They had to say goodbye to all that was familiar to them in Babylon, where they'd grown and lived for the last 70 years, including friendships and relationships with other Jews who said, hey, God bless you, have a great trip, we're just going to stay right here. But God be with you. Go ahead if you're foolish enough to make that journey. I'm staying here. They had to leave those people, and undoubtedly family members. They had to, even if they made it alive on that long journey, 1,000 miles, they had to arrive at a city where they already knew the temple was decimated. It was reduced to rubble. The houses were all burned to the ground. The farming or food production had all ceased to exist. And water supplies were probably scarce. I mean, we're talking about a little house on the prairie here. It's difficult. And yet there were some people there that said, we're going to sign up for this. Because that's our home. That's where we belong. That's God's holy city. And we need to get back there and resettle our area and do what God had called us to do. I want to give something to you. Let's see, we'll get Emiliano. You have more energy than most of us. Could you give me a hand real quickly, please? Could you hand one of these out to everybody? I promise you I'll try to get you a handout. Hey, we expect you there tomorrow, next Saturday on time for that 5K run, okay? No, I want excuses. He's a defending champion in his age group. But he said he's playing soccer. His mom's got him in soccer. He says he's trying to talk me into having Pastor Joel delay the start of the race so he can leave his soccer practice after he runs around a field all morning and then show up at the starting line and run a 5K race. But weren't those days? I would long for those days again. I walk across the street and I have to catch my breath, you know. This chart is an overview on the book of Ezra. And you can see there's a lot of important things. We'll be referring to this in the coming weeks, but it really, I looked at no less than 20 different charts. This is the one I like the best. It summarized the entire book, and it highlights some important things about this great enterprise of leaving captivity and going all the way back and making that long journey to get back. And when they got there, they had to start from scratch. And one of their first priorities was to build the temple. And for those of you who've already received your chart, in the middle of that chart, there's a line that says about 22 years, another one that says about 2 years. So it took about 22 years for them to get there, get settled, and rebuild the temple. Even though they were giving what we would consider to be immeasurable financial resources. It was kind of like somebody financed the whole project. Not only did Cyrus give a gift to them to take, but while they were going, they were encouraged to take this decree from Cyrus and ask their fellow man to provide gold, silver, and other valuable items that they could use in the construction of this temple. No doubt they had to purchase wood and other materials as well. But it was financially financed, but it was a lot of work. In fact, it took these people 22 years. We're going to find out in the coming weeks why it took so long, because as in any great enterprise for God, there's always opposition. And they faced some opposition as well. But they made that journey there, and thank God there were some people with a pioneering spirit. I'm gonna read to you the sentiments expressed by this group of people, because we'll probably meet some of them when we get to heaven one day. And I love the attitude and perspective of these people. They're remarkable. Some of us respect the early pioneers and what they did in traveling across continental United States and settling into these difficult areas and carving out a life. And here we are. Somebody came to California and decided to build a settlement, and we grew into a city or a township. And here we are. I read, I don't know if I should share this. I read an article this past week that they listed the 50 states. They list the 50 states from worst to best for retired people. You know where I'm going with this, don't you? Ironically, Terry, the number one state, and they do it on the basis of cost of living. That was their perspective, you know. And they would say things like, "Oh, it's beautiful, and who would want to go to Hawaii?" Hawaii's at the top of the list because of it. I don't know how much gas is a gallon there, but it was when I was there, it was 25 cents a gallon. So it's probably, I'm guessing it's a little more than that now. But based upon the standard of living, and the main factor is housing. So if you grow up and you're renting, your rent continues to go up. They said Hawaii is, for retired people, the worst state to live in because the cost of living for everything is high. Second on the list is California. What are you people doing here anyway? And again, they said, in spite of the beautiful terrain, and I tell my wife all the time, we pay for the weather. We're paying for the weather, honey. You know, that's not a good thought this week when it's been 100 degrees. We're paying for the weather. But cost of living, not only California, they also mentioned the sales tax here is the highest in the nation at nearly 8% sales tax. But whatever the case may be, these people were going to an area, a difficult area and a hard job. But listen to what motivated them. I'm going to end with this. And if you want to turn me to Psalm 137, if I've not said that already, I want to tell you what motivated these people to do this crazy thing, to engage in this crazy enterprise, to leave everything that was familiar to them, to travel this great distance of 1,000 miles over difficult terrain and go back to their homeland of Jerusalem. And Psalm 137 summarizes their reasoning. It says, "By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down. Yea, we wept, and we remembered Zion." Zion is another name for Jerusalem. The old timers said, when we thought about our homeland, it made us just cry. "We hanged our harps upon the willows in the midst thereof. For there they that carried us away captive required of us a song." They said, "Come on, sing something to us. Give us a song from your homeland." "And they that wasted us required of us mirth, saying, Sing us one of the songs of Zion. How shall we sing the Lord's song in a strange land?" I love that. "If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let not my right hand forget her cunning. If I do not remember thee, let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth, if I prefer not Jerusalem above my chief joy." Wow, do you see the emotion? We can't capture the emotion in the hearts and lives, especially those old timers, who really had a difficult time making that journey. Speaking from experience, I'm not running any 5K next Saturday. Some of these people were well up in years, and they had to travel 1,000 miles on foot through the desert. But they said, how can we sing a song of joy and praise to our God here in this foreign land? They wanted to go back. And I have to give them their credit. They did. According to your chart, we'll cover this later, guess how many of the people answered that call to go back to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple and rebuild their city? 50,000. The other waves of exiles were much smaller, small percentage. But that first group, 50,000 people answered the call and said, we'll make the journey. We want to sing songs of praise to God in our holy city. And for that, I have to give them credit. Father,